Hello and welcome again to All Things Money. Today we've got a very special guest with us, the former Federal Finance Minister, Mr. Miftah Ismail. Miftah bhai, how are you doing?
Thank you very much. I'm well.
Miftah bhai, you just launched a political party. Congratulations on the same. What's the plan now?
So the party gets launched on 6th of July, and the plan then is that we are going to go everywhere in Punjab, Sindh, KP, Balochistan, Gilgit-Baltistan, Azad Kashmir, and organize our party on the ground. We have some presence on the social media already, but we need to have presence on the ground. So we're going to organize the party in every district, every division, every zilla, every tehsil, and then inshallah, take our message to the people, and then let's see.
How much time do you think all of this would take to really have grassroots presence?
At least a year. It will take a year to organize the party across Pakistan. There are so many divisions, 38 or so many districts. And we want to have office bearers in every district of Pakistan, in the rural areas, every tehsil, in every city. So it's going to take some time. But the response so far, even in the pre-launch phase, has been very good, very encouraging.
So what model are we following here? Are we following a full grassroots model where we actually competent people may come up, rise up to the ranks, or we are following the tried and tested electoral model, the electable model?
So we have actually tried to bring in people who are not in politics traditionally, or not so far in politics. So people like lawyers of Karachi, from Mr. Muiz Jafri or Muiz Beg, many lawyers and young lawyers in Islamabad, professors from Karachi, Lala Rukh, Ijaz from Islamabad, Tariq Suleiman, Dr. Tariq Suleiman, other professionals like Dr. Tariq Chima, who was a physician in America but has settled in Pakistan, Dr. Azhar Aslam, who was a surgeon in England but has settled in Pakistan. So we have Sumaira Khan from KP, Bina Raza from Lahore. These are not known people because they're not people who come on TV like I do or Shahid Abbasi does, but people who are concerned about Pakistan. And what we think is that what is the most important thing is that we need to change the conversation in Pakistan, away from the polarization that takes place and away from the enmity that exists between politicians. And we need to talk about the issues that the people of Pakistan face. Nobody talks about that. Even if you look at the budget, today, it's the fight over how much money do I get or do my MNAs get in PSDP. It's not about the tax on salaried class or tax on infant formula. So we think that we need to talk about the issues of the people, and then we'll see.
So I think that's a great segue into what really matters. One thing that I just feel really matters is the whole demographic composition. We've got a booming population, which is a privilege in an environment where all other countries actually have negative birth rates. What we really need and how do we capitalize on this? One more thing I would like to add here, about 40% of our children below 5 are essentially stunted. Their intellectual development is not really there because nutrition is not there. More than 20 million children are out of school. You rightfully said, we can discuss a few numbers here and there in the budget, but that's accounting. How we treat our children, how we treat our demographic factors is what really going to determine how we grow in the future. What do you think you're going to do differently here?
So, Pakistanis also refer to our youth population as the demographic dividend. And other countries do that too. But the fact of the matter is that this is not a demographic dividend for us if you're not going to educate them. You said 224 million kids out of school, which is about 40% of our total school-going age children. We also have the largest number of school-age children out of school in the world, more than India, more than China, more than Indonesia, more than Brazil. And that's a shame, really is, and it's shameful for Pakistanis and our governments to have this really unenviable record. Then you also have as you mentioned, 40% kids who under the age of 5 were stunted, another 17% are wasted, and that number has not changed. The stunted number has not gone down in 20 years. In fact, it has inched up a little. So it's really not a demographic dividend if you're not educating them. It's not a demographic dividend if these kids are stunted mentally as well as physically stunted. So, and this year we will have 8 million babies born. and we don't have the resources to put them in school. So it is only a demographic dividend if you educate them and you make them ready to compete in the world. Then our kids are good enough to compete with anybody. But if they remain uneducated, if they remain mentally stunted, physically stunted, disabled, if they remain hungry, if they remain unhealthy, how can they compete? So we have to convert our youth from a liability into an asset, and that can only be done through education, health, and basic food and basic income.
So how do we do that? If you look at the budget right now, there is allocation of budget, provincial allocation, federal allocation. I would say the cumulative education budget in the country is almost 1.5 trillion rupees, but 90% of that is just salaries. Throwing more money at the problem does not really solve the outcome problem. In fact, Pakistan, as a percentage of GDP, spends more than a few other countries where they have a higher literacy rate. So clearly throwing money at the problem isn't really solving this. How do we really structurally solve this problem, or what the party, let's say, view is on this?
I think that's the best question, really, and the most important question. So you're right about, we spend about $1.5 trillion rupees on education from the government sector, which includes provincial governments who are responsible for education as well as federal government. That's 1.5% of GDP. But that's not all we spend. The private sector educates actually more than half the children. And there are private universities and all that. So we probably spend close to 3% of GDP and 3 trillion.
That's right. I did an estimate once, it was around 4 trillion rupees,
okay,
all income.
So 4%. So, and you're absolutely also right that we actually spend more money than many other countries. But the fact of the matter is that we don't educate our children. 78% of 10-year-olds in Pakistan cannot read 2 sentences in any language. If they have been taught in Urdu or Sindhi, whatever languages they've been taught in, they cannot read 2 sentences. That's 78% of 10-year-olds. Sindh is the worst in Pakistan, but KP, Punjab, Balochistan, none of them is really very good. More than 60% of kids, 5th grade kids in Pakistan cannot do 2nd grade math. So the money that the government spends, 1.5 trillion, essentially is wasted, okay? You waste the children's time, because the fact of the matter is that these education ministries in the provinces are not meant to educate, they are meant to give jobs to potential voters. I can bet you that if you give a test of physics and chemistry to science teachers in Sindh, half of them, metric science teachers in Sindh, half of them will fail. So the fact is that, the kids are never actually meant to be educated. It is the money is only going for the ministry and salaries and to hire potential voters. So how does it change? First thing you need to change is to change your thinking. Once you start thinking differently, that no, we have to educate kids, then everything else becomes possible. Up until the 1990s, we were the richest country in South Asia. Now, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives are all ahead of us. I think Nepal is also much ahead of us in terms of human development. The only country behind us is Afghanistan. What has gone wrong? We've lost our way. Our governance is outdated, debilitated, and useless. It protects only the few. And our politics is polarized. And we are just in a rut. We don't think through things. Look at this budget. Where you are asking people to sacrifice and pay more taxes of their salaries, you're at the same time giving monies to MNAs to spend. So the priorities are wrong. So once you decide that, okay, the idea is to educate kids, not to employ teachers, then 2 things you need to do really, 3 things. Once you supposedly you have empowered local governments, so you give schools to local government. That's where everywhere in the world, you cannot expect a bureaucrat sitting in Lahore to control all schools from Ammar H Khan to Attak. Or you should not expect a bureaucrat sitting in Karachi to control all schools from Gotki to Karachi, and in Balochistan the distances are even more. So that's one, localize this. Second, each school, government spends about 5,000 rupees per child that it supposedly educates, or it schools. That's 60,000 rupees a year. Of 80% of that, 48,000 should be given to parents that they can use that voucher to send their children to private schools. That is going to force competition on government schools. In Punjab, I know that there is dispersion. There are some good public government schools and some not so good public schools. So you will see that not so good public school kids will leave, the parents will opt for private schools, and there are very many cheap private schools which are less than 4,000 rupees a month. So the private schools become affordable. These are regulated private schools and all that. The government's job is to regulate and pay for this education. And the third thing is that where in small villages and etc. there are no private schools, or you cannot privatize these things, or even in good government schools, you have a board. Board will consist of parents, board will consist of government officials, and board will consist of educationists and people in the community. And the government should give them budget, and I promise you they will run schools better than the bureaucrats right now.
Essentially, what we're saying is it's a two-pronged solution. You have to really localize schools. You need local boards. You need board at district levels. I would even say at tehsil level as well, because again, there are too many schools in even a single tehsil. And you need to have some kind of a public-private structure as well, where whatever private school infrastructure that exists can be utilized for through those vouchers that you said. But don't you think it's the state's responsibility to ensure education of every single child? And that when we get private sector into the picture, this will lead to more perverse incentives. How would we regulate the quality there?
First of all, it is the state's responsibility. That's why state is paying for it. Right now, the state is failing this responsibility. It is not educating children. When 78% of the kids cannot read 2 sentences, the state has obviously failed. What I'm saying is that rather than wasting this money that the state wastes and basically just to hire unqualified teachers who are potential voters, you now have state paying for it. These are regulated private schools, approved, licensed private schools, and you only pay for the kids when they go to school.
So one thing that
the state, so the state is not taking. I'm not absolving the state from its responsibility. State is responsible for educating kids. It doesn't have to provide that service itself. It can hire cheaper, better private schools. Just pay for those schools. Just as like when for instance you go to a doctor and you have insurance, the insurance company doesn't come and heal you. It pays for it and you can go to a private doctor. So similarly, the state pays for it, but you can go to a private school.
Foundation in Pakistan, which runs a lot of schools, and the costs of educating one child is around 3,500 to 4,000 rupees per month, which is largely in the range that you're talking about. But obviously, a little less. The outcomes there are much better than what we do. So clearly, the education, the whole funding system is failing at this point. So one thing,
and I don't really mind, sorry to cut you, but I mean, I don't really mind the state spending a little more money as long as they were educating children, but they're not even educating children. So it's a complete waste of money. Sorry.
So one thing that happens here, I think this will just overlap all our other conversations as well, is with state-owned enterprises, with government departments. Let's say you've got like hundreds of thousands of teachers that exist, just like a lot of state-owned enterprise employees that exist. When you want to restructure something, when you want to start something, there's a lot of resistance. And that leads to a lot of political governments basically buckling under pressure. How does one deal with that?
I mean, the thing is, this is what politicians are supposed to do, right? Take pressure, put their politics on the line, do the right thing. This is like the same with putting tax on shopkeepers. The right thing to do is to check them, but the governments get scared. So the first thing you do is you give a test. Let every teacher in Sindh or Balochistan or KP or Punjab pass the test. You know that half of them will be culled right there. And then we're not asking that qualified teachers be fired. They're still government employees. We're just asking that people who don't know physics should not be teaching physics. So I mean, that's a very basic thing. I'm saying that, if you're going to drive a car, then you should know how to drive a car. If you're going to teach physics and math and chemistry or English or Sindhi or Urdu, then you should know those subjects. If you don't, then sorry, but get yourself educated first before you become a teacher. So that's the first thing. Then you still need to have much more kids coming into the school system. So the demand for qualified teachers, whether in private or public sector, will not reduce. It will continue to increase. And what I'm saying about school boards, by the way, is actually on every school there should be a board. And they should be, obviously there are government policies, about curriculum and all of those stuff. Those should be followed. But empower every school, parents in every school, and they will make sure that the teachers come to school. But if there is a teacher who is either not qualified or doesn't teach or doesn't come to school, why are we paying him a salary? So I think that's a basic thing. So you have to change the mindset that, look, we are giving you a salary, we are happy to employ you.
You have to improve.
But you have to teach our kids. If you're not going to teach our kids, we're not going to keep you.
Makes sense. All right, moving from education, talking about health. What's your view on health? Should the state be providing some kind of a state-based insurance program, or should the state just be providing federal hospitals? How does that work, or a mix of the systems?
The state should not be investing in hospitals. By the way, Sindh government and Punjab government, they've both done pilot programs on the voucher schemes. Punjab, quite a big program, and it turns out much more successful and much cheaper to run these pilot programs. Coming to hospitals now, if you go to a state-run social security hospital or anything of the sort, you will see that, I mean, those hospitals are full of dirt and bacteria and stuff like that. We really need to provide better education. At the same time, you know, the idea of giving insurance without paying premiums is also wrong. We've seen that in PTI's government, they gave insurance to everybody, but they didn't really pay for it. And so, you know, when we came into power, there was a big problem both with Mera Ghar Mera housing scheme and with this thing, that they'd given houses to people, but they'd not decided to pay for it. So, I mean, these are not easy things. So, what you need to do is you have basic health units that you do.
At a district tehsil level.
At the tehsil level, okay. Then you have district hospitals and all that stuff. You don't provide insurance to everybody, and certainly not to the richer half of the population. But to the poor half of the population, for major medical things like cancer and, you know, heart surgeries and dialysis and all that you provide. And you bring in private charitable organization into it, and you come up with a fund, and then you do it.
Okay, so just building on that, I've lived in Punjab, I lived in Karachi as well. The difference in healthcare in Karachi, if you go to NSEVD, it's as, I would say, socialist as it comes. You know, you just go and you don't even need to have a CNIs. You just walk in, get yourself treated, and you will get treated regardless of whether you're rich or poor, does not matter. You'll be in the same queue. SIUT is a great example there. In Punjab, when it comes to insurance, you need to be listed, you need to be a citizen, you need to have some kind of domicile. That kind of exclusion comes into play. Where do you see is the right balance? And more importantly, if you even look at the budget numbers of different provinces, you will see a lot more spending be done on, let's say, I would say, pet projects in large cities. How do we move out of this large city infrastructure problem and actually start building basic health units out there?
Well, that is a problem in Pakistan. I mean, Sindh government actually, I mean, normally its governance is atrocious. But actually in healthcare, tertiary healthcare, they're actually not bad. And partly because there is a lot of private charitable donation in Sindh. In Civil Hospital and Jinnah and all these places, there's a lot of private sector people who spend a lot of money. But the Sindh government also does that. I mean, I have to give credit to that. And frankly speaking, the health standard at the highest level in Karachi are actually much better than the rest of Pakistan. I mean, there is no such thing as Ammar H Khan anywhere in Pakistan, you know. But that said, you need to, obviously, I mean, it's okay for citizens to require, governments to require that we will provide only to Pakistani citizens or people who are residents of our province. You know, if they've lived for a year, that should be more than enough, or even 6 months, that should be more than enough. But outside of that, I think that there should be some charitable hospitals where if you can't afford, you know, you should get free education, free treatment. And there is Indus, for instance, in Karachi. Now they're building one in Lahore. I mean, these are private charitable hospitals. You also utilize the private charitable trusts in this. You give them tax exemption, give them land, stuff like that. And you also put in government money along with them, match government dollars, but let the private charitable trust run it. But like I said, you know, you have to think of a combination of health insurance for major medical reasons, not for outpatients and not for small things.
So, Miftah, one thing, you know, in health we say prevention is better than cure. A lot of diseases that we treat, and a lot of money is spent on treating those, kidney dialysis being a major component of that, are avoidable and can be avoided through basic sanitation,
yes,
availability of water supply. How do we improve infrastructure at a city, district, tehsil, rural level? Because drinking water in Pakistan, you and I both know, it's not potable, it's not drinkable. The water infrastructure exists, but supply of water through that does not. How do we solve the water problem?
I think that requires substantial investments in pipelines and filtration plants. Even when we boil water at home, that's a huge loss to the economy because so much gas is being wasted, and it would be better off just to clean that water, you know, at the source. And you're absolutely right that prevention is better than the cure. Hepatitis, diarrhea, and all of those things, diseases can be curtailed significantly if there were hygiene standards maintained at the government level. So there's no substitute for that. But the government has to, take responsibility for health. And when I say responsibility, I don't mean that they have to provide it. But for instance, you have 5% of companies' profits going into workers' profit participation fund, WPPF, and then there is welfare fund also that goes into the state bank. That money, instead of charging the industries, you can say that those industries that provide health insurance to 100% of their employees
are exempt from that.
And so they will provide. And the other thing is, one of the planks of our party is that there is no concept of temporary workers. There is no such thing as contractual workers. If some worker has worked for 90 days in a calendar year in your company, that worker is permanent. But even if you let him go for 2 days after 89 days, number one. Number two, that even a temporary worker on day one will get the same benefits and salary as an unskilled permanent employee. So there is no incentive for employers to discriminate. That we have to do. At the same time, those workers who don't work, the company should be able to let them go with generous amount of severance pay, but nonetheless they should be able to let them go. So I think we need to change our labor laws, and I think we need to address. Not everything should be addressed at the governmental level. The government should try to address everything at the private sector level, and only when the market fails does the government walk in.
That's right.
So the government's responsibility is, yes, to ensure that everybody is educated and healthy, but it should incentivize and regulate and make laws so that the private sector takes responsibility for it.
So one thing that we started the conversation, that it's all about having the right competent people in place. Political parties in Pakistan never really have any serious manifesto. When reached for all the manifestos, there's no really coherence in it. Do you think it makes sense for your party to actually have something that's basically developed ground up from a district level to a province and then at a national level, rather than just being more top down in nature? Because district problems may be completely different from the national problem.
District problems are always different from national problems, and problems differ from district to district. But in Karachi, for instance, we still don't have drinking water in pipelines. After 75 years, and 20 years of People's Party governance, alhamdulillah, they have not been able to figure out how to provide water. Even in DHAs,
there is no water. There is no water.
But obviously everybody has water. We all get water. We just have to buy it. So there is a mafia involved and, corruption involved and all that, but everybody gets water.
That's a market clearing price.
The thing is that the government should be providing water in pipes rather than stopping it and then making hydrants and giving it out its political favors or whatnot. In other districts, hepatitis is a problem because, for instance, some leather companies let go of effluents and pollutants in the river, and so Punjab, there is a problem like that. There are different districts have different problems. In KP, there's terrorism and law and order is a big problem. Balochistan, there are other problems, jobs, etc. Those districts' problems have to be addressed by local leaders. But a national party which is writing a plan or a manifesto or a platform or a vision cannot really talk about hundreds of districts, right? That would be a never-ending.
No, so my point here is a lot of these problems are parallel. For example, drinking water is a problem, and there are a few interventions through which most of these problems can be resolved.
So in our, for instance, we have a couple of paragraphs on water, which will talk about water reservoirs and the need to save water, conserve water. But we will also talk about the importance of making sure that every Pakistani has potable water in his home or her home. But then every problem in the district can be tackled separately, but these are the visions that we have.
So that's what I'm saying. We know the why and the what's. About the how, do we need a plan in place, or are we just going to go in firefighting mode all the time? Because this is what I felt whenever a new government comes. We're just in firefighting mode till another government comes. How do we solve this problem?
When you are in government, and if you're a minister, like I've been Minister of Finance twice, there is firefighting all the time. Yeah. Clearly, if there's a fire going on, if I get a phone call at 8 in the morning that if you don't give money today, PSO is going to default, then that is the first problem I will solve. Yes. Okay, I will not do anything else that day. I'll say, okay, let's just figure out, call PSO and all of that stuff. If you get a phone call that, you need to pay this much money, otherwise some disco will, like default will happen, or the Chinese are angry or whatever. So you have to firefight. But there should always be people who are thinking long term.
Yes.
And certainly in opposition, you have the time to think long term than think policy. But unless and until we implement long term policies, which are important but not necessarily urgent, we don't get out of problems. In our plan that we are going to release on the 6th of July, and I don't know when this show is going to be released, you will see that we will also talk about our vision for Pakistan and what we need to do. And the number one how that we've talked about is changing our own thinking. If Bangladesh can get ahead and India can get ahead, there's no reason why we can't get ahead. Okay? I'll give you an example. In Pakistan, when Musharraf Sahib was president, there was some talk of too many guns coming into Pakistan, and they said, the government should ban all guns, automatic rifles or whatever, assault rifles and all that stuff. And people said, no, we can't do this. It's part of the Pashtun culture, for instance, or it's part of Pakistani culture that we should have guns. People carry guns. That's part of our culture, supposedly. Okay, fine. Then in Afghanistan, Mullah Muhammad Umar came. And Mullah Muhammad Umar decided that nobody should have gun but the government. And surely the culture on the other side of the Durand line is the same as on this side of the Durand line. And everybody, everybody agreed, or everybody, conceded to the demand of the government. So it's actually the writ of the government. And you have to think differently that in modern societies, there are certain things you cannot do. I mean, gun, for instance, may be one example, but there are many examples, that this is not acceptable. In a modern society, you cannot let the government teach kids when 78% people cannot read. This is just wrong. This is just waste of money. So, but we have to think of things that we can do as opposed to think of things that we cannot do. We have limited our vision.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so going a bit more macro right now. One thing I'd always say is that the composition of GDP in the country is just purely consumption. 95% of GDP is consumption. Import-driven. In any other countries, South Asia, around 80%, 28% of GDP is investments. In the case of Pakistan, it's 30%. How do we change this equation? Because everything essentially just boils down to this: the lack of investment, the lack of productive enterprise. This leads to more consumption, and it's a bad feedback loop. How do we move from a consumption-oriented economy to an investment? I understand you cannot do it in 6 months or 12 months, maybe like a 3 or 5 year plan. How do we do that transition?
I've thought about this. I'm not sure if I know the answer. And I'm not even sure that the statistics are so robust, to be very honest with you. Because if you look at Bangladesh, Sri Lanka is a little less, maybe little less than 28%. India is about 30%. Bangladesh is about 32%. Savings to GDP ratio, right? And, we are not that culturally different from Bengalis and Indians and Sri Lankans. We're different, but not that different. So all of a sudden, when their savings rates are 30% and our savings rate is 15%, something is going on here. It could be that
it's an informal economy. A lot of savings is basically cash. Please come back to that.
It could be that. It could be an undervaluation of our land prices, and which are part of industrial investments and all that. It could be also that we siphon off money to Dubai and all that stuff. But so there is some saving. But there is also the other side. I've talked to Ali Chima, for instance, the economist, I think one of the best economists in Pakistan, and he's the vice chancellor of LUMS. And Ali was saying that, if you have, for instance, we typically like to keep currency fixed at like for a year, 2 years.
Yeah.
And then after 2 years, we realize, oh my God,
we depreciate by 15%.
We've run out of money. Yeah. So then what happens is that when we run out of money, then we devalue by 30–40%. So on average, our devaluation is about 7–8%.
Average.
But we do this in
like
big jumps. So now, if you are 6 months or a year away from devaluation, what it affects us not so much exports but as imports. Like in 2018 and then again in 2021, the exports were essentially flat. It's the imports that skyrocketed. So what happens in those periods is that people are realizing that, the government will eventually devalue. So let me just do all the dollar consumptions I want to do today, rather than wait.
So that's the incentive, right? You consume today rather than say for tomorrow.
Because what's the point? Because your rupee is going to devalue in 6 months or 8 months. So you said, let me just spend all the money right now.
So that is where the whole concept of interest rate comes into play. That real interest rate, we like maintaining a negative real interest rate for the longest time. And a lot of people just say, okay, interest rate does not matter in Pakistan. Very well, it does, and it does basically everywhere else as well. We just like to believe it doesn't. What's your view on that? Let's say Awam Pakistan Party, that's the name, right?
Awam Pakistan.
Awam Pakistan.
There is no party.
Okay, Awam Pakistan.
I mean,
Let's say Awam Pakistan come. Awam Pakistan come, and for some odd reason, it's able to have like a full 5 years in play. It's difficult, right? You never say never. So, what will be your policy regarding inflation? What would be the inflation target that we would be looking at, and that will eventually determine what the interest rates would be? And more importantly, how would you bring that inflation under control? Because Pakistan, we see spurt.
Okay, let me just start with this. So I totally agree with you that whatever economics works in the rest of the world also works in Pakistan.
Yes.
Okay? And one way of controlling inflation is through interest rates. It's not the only way. There are many other ways.
Supply this one.
But reducing federal spending, fiscal spending is another way. There are many other ways. But basically, when there is high inflation, there are one of two ways you can reduce inflation. One is to curtail demand, which interest rate does, high interest rates does. Another way to curtail demand is through fiscal contraction, or then you can increase supply if there is a supply chain disruption, things like that. Then the target of the inflation, Pakistan is actually not a very high inflation country historically, but we've had moderately high inflation throughout our history, about 8%, 9%.
That's right, 8-9%, I guess.
And I think that this is also a little too high. I think that we should be in the beginning target at a 5% inflation. And that's what I think we should be targeting at. But really, I think that we should have competent people in the State Bank, competent board and MPC people, and who should decide that how to do this, and then not interfering from the government.
So that's the thing with the interest rate. Government essentially is the largest borrower. 70% of banking assets is just the government borrowing. And you're right, reducing spending solves this problem halfway through, because as demand of funds goes down, your interest rate will reduce as well. So how do you manage your deficits? Let's say we reduce the spending as well. Now we're coming on the revenue side. We need to increase the tax base. Everyone knows, you and I have talked about it as well. Awam Pakistan comes into play. How does that work?
Well, first of all, I realize and I think that the problem in Pakistan is not that we don't tax people enough. The problem is that we spend too much as a nation. And no Pakistani government fiscal problem will be solved unless and until NFC is re-looked at. You can talk about whatever else you want, tax this, that, tax that, nothing. And you will realize, maybe I've known for a few years, some other people besides me have also known, people who've looked at finances very closely. People get emotional about this and they talk about federalism and 18th Amendment. Nothing to do with it. 18th Amendment you can keep. But you really need to relook at NFC. And until and unless NFC is looked at again and the share of the provinces are reduced and the taxes that provinces are supposed to charge but they don't, unless they are transferred or share reduced or going forward share is reduced, Pakistani finances will never come under control, and Pakistan will not have very low inflation, and Pakistan will always have significant poverty. So if you want to reduce poverty, inflation, you have to reduce deficit, and the way to reduce deficit is to relook at NFC votes.
So interestingly, when we look at the federal budget, it's all doom and gloom. Things are not right, we don't have money, but the moment you start looking at provincial budgets, they're like handling out stuff all over the
Oh,
place.
yes.
That's basically because you're getting money without any accountability.
Some provinces are, other provinces, God knows what happens to their money.
So because largely there is no accountability.
There's no accountability, there's no cost because they're not raising revenue. They get this manna from heaven and they just go out and distribute.
So instead of, let's say, taking away revenue, that's a difficult one. What do you think of passing down costs? For example, BISP was 600 billion. Electricity subsidies. What do you think about reallocating
Even
costs?
Shahid Abbasi Saab thinks that. But that's, as an economist, I don't believe that because I want to see that the marginal benefit of raising taxes to the federal government goes to the federal government.
Yes.
Okay, it's not 60% going away to the provinces. I want to give the right incentive to the provinces that, if you're going to dole out solar panels or motorcycles or give subsidies to tractors, you will have to raise
your finances.
That only happens when you say that, we're going to reduce your share. One of the things that I proposed was that this year's revenue, let's say 9,200, you give them at, whatever percentage you're giving, 57.5 plus 1% plus 0.4% plus what you give to Gilgit-Baltistan. And after that, beyond that, 80% should go to the federal government. Okay? And then the provinces can raise their own revenue. But their marginal costs, there have to be, provinces, the chief ministers of provinces will have to understand that when they are spending $1, 1 rupee, they will have to raise 1 rupee someplace. And unless that happens, it doesn't happen. And then the other thing that, by provincializing power or provincializing
Social security payments.
Provincializing gas, it's one step better than federalizing it. But the better solution is just to privatize them. And then, if the federal or the provincial government wants to provide poor people subsidies from their own budget, they can do it. But let them raise their own taxes. The biggest problem in Pakistan that the federal government faces, if you look at Shehbaz Sharif and Aurangzeb, they're running from pillar to post trying to raise revenues. If you look at the chief ministers of provinces, especially in Punjab, Mariam is just giving away stuff. I don't know what Murad does with all the money he has. Because he actually, on a per capita basis, Sarfraz Bhakti and Murad get more money than Punjab does. Sindh and KP and Balochistan, all three get more money. They don't do as many programs. I don't know what happens. But the fact of the matter is that they need to spend money. They need to raise their own money.
So that's a thing. The whole mindset is spending money rather than raising money.
So nothing gets done unless you change the way you think. So we say that if DawnNews English allows me to say this in Urdu, कि सोच बदलो, Pakistan badal jayega.
So when you say change your thinking, it looks nice, but do you think it is possible?
Of course,
many bigger things have happened, but how does one?
There is no choice but to do it. There is no choice but to do it. So Pakistan right now is in a very unfortunate trajectory that in 5 years our best solution is to be like Bangladesh. Our most likely solution is to be like Afghanistan. Worst solution would be like Myanmar. So where do you want to go? You want to leave your 240 million or 24 crore people in poverty? 40% of Pakistanis are living under poverty. That should be shameful for the Ashrafia or the elites of this country. Another 10 to 15 million people will go because of this budget during this next fiscal year. You know that.
Yeah.
In a country where you have to tax Indus Hospital, which is a charitable hospital which doesn't even have a till or a cash register, in a country where you ask them to pay sales tax, in a country where when you put tax on infant formula and packaged milk, and you give money to MPAs and MNAs, 75 billion at the federal level, maybe 400 billion at the provincial level, and you spend 1400 billion rupees on PSDP, and the fight between People's Party and PMLN was not about reducing taxes, not about reducing direct or indirect taxes. It was about how much share do I get from PSDP. I think that thinking needs to change. I think we really need to rethink what is this country about? What is this governance about? Is this why Quaid-e-Azam built Pakistan? Is this the promise? Would he be satisfied? No, this is wrong.
Makes sense. So one thing here, in terms, I'm just going to focus more on sectors now, agriculture. One thing a friend and I were there, and I always talk about is minimum wage is largely a function of food inflation. because the food inflation in the country is so high, basic necessities are so expensive that you have to keep increasing your minimum wage to get to a certain point. We've seen food inflation essentially tracking the PKR USD parity, and if I look at wheat prices since 98 to let's say 24, 90% of change in wheat prices can be explained by PKR depreciation. My question here is, what do we do in agriculture or to A, ensure food security? Everyone wants food security, but a lot of things have distortionate things happen due to that. And B, essentially improve our yield. What's the agricultural plan here?
Look, there is nobody against food security, but food security is a red herring.
Yes.
A diversion people use to indulge in subsidies, indulge in protectionist policies, indulge in elite capture, rentier,
That's
stuff. In this day and age, when there is so much transport, how much wheat do we need to keep for ensuring security? We utilize about 2.5 million tons of wheat, right?
25 million, 25 tons.
2 million tons, 2.5 million tons a month, right?
Yeah.
So if you have 5 million tons of wheat in storage,
that's more than enough.
That's more than enough, right? What else do you need? Nothing, right? We have our own cows, we have our own goats, we have our own chickens. We grow, first of all, we grow our own wheat, but I mean, let's say that we keep another 5 million tons of wheat in storage. That's food security. What else do you need to keep? What are we talking about food security again and again and again and again? When have we run out of edible oil? We don't grow any edible oil seeds in Pakistan.
Keep importing it.
We keep importing. We don't run out of refrigerators ever. We don't make refrigerator compressors in Pakistan. We never run out of them. We don't make our Apple phones and all that. You go to Hafiz Center in Lahore or Sadr in Karachi, and the markets are full of it.
Yeah.
The only time we have shortages is what government provides: bijli, pani, and electricity.
Distortion, price distortion.
Because the government is inefficient. So, in agriculture, it's very simple. The government should get out of
fixing
prices. Okay.
Agreed.
The government, I firmly believe in. When I was finance minister and Shahbaz Sharif asked me, and Tariq Bashir Chima asked me, it's going to cost $75 million to do the deal with Monsanto or Bayer or something and get seeds, cotton seeds, GMO cotton seeds. I said, I will give you the money. Don't worry about where I'll get the money from. That's my problem. You will have the money. Do this. The easiest, lowest hanging fruit is agriculture.
Yes.
The government's job is to actually not even do research. Because, I mean, let's just be honest.
We don't have the capacity.
Pakistani Muslims are not meant to do research. In this century, not maybe, another 200 years from now. Let's just not, try to reinvent wheels with the Chinese and the Europeans have done it, okay? Let's just buy the research and pay for it, okay? Where we have good yields in Pakistan?
Maize.
In maize. You know why? Because of one company, Rafan Maize. Rafan Maize has been bringing, because it's the largest buyer of maize, it's been bringing maize and all that stuff, seeds and all that, helping farmers. Now potatoes, we have very good potatoes because of Lay's
chips.
Okay. So the point is that the government has to help them in cotton. Today, our farmer grows 25% less wheat per hectare than a Chinese farmer.
That's right.
So our farmer will never be able to compete in a free market if other things are equal, because we produce less from, So we need to raise our yields. So whatever you do, help with the farmers, with the harvesters you do, whatever you do, help with them with education you do, whatever you need to do to help them with seeds you do. Outside of that, don't set up prices, okay? And that's it. That's all you need to do.
So essentially the government, we all agree that...
Look at rice. The only success story in Pakistan, brutal success story in Pakistan, alhamdulillah. Why is rice doing so well? Because the government
does not set prices.
And the government is out of it. There was a time when you were very young or not born, that there used to be something called RECP, Rice Export Corporation of Pakistan, and they used to buy rice and then exports and then used to sell it in local markets, whatever they left, and supposedly rodents would eat so much of the stock every year, and stuff
Like
that.
like wheat.
Like wheat. And then the government got out of it. And we've never run out of rice. We get the best quality basmati rice, alhamdulillah, in the world. And we export more and more. So, government gets out of it, everything will be fine.
Okay, I fully agree with that. So, I think I agree. I mean, there's a very strong policy overarching view that the government needs to out of it, let the market figure it out.
And yes, I mean, one other thing that I forgot to mention, I mean, besides the seeds, besides the equipment, bank loans and all that, one of the things that we need to do is we cry about the fact that we don't grow as much cotton and we grow a lot more cane sugar. Although cane sugar consumes a lot of water, but we don't price water correctly.
Yes.
But the other thing we need to realize is that cotton is a very, very sensitive crop and cane is a very hardy crop. So you need to make sure that farmers who are growing cotton and products that we think we need, they should be able to buy insurance against weather effects.
So coming to insurance, now we're just moving towards more capital markets and financial institutions. I mean, we all know government is once again the biggest borrower. Capital markets haven't really moved. If anything, they've regressed over the last 15 years. Pakistan used to do like $1 billion plus traded value in like 06, 07. Right now, it's mainly barely a fraction of that. What needs to be done on that front? A, in terms of banks, and B, in terms of actually making the capital markets more vibrant.
Sometimes it's better to just wait things out and not do anything. The government need to not do anything about capital markets. The government needs to just mind its own business, and the markets will grow.
The market will take care of it.
Just don't worry about changing policies too much. Don't try to jumpstart the market. Again, when you try, every now and whenever the stock market falls, all the brokers go and say, well, ask EOPI to buy
NIT
shares. NIT buy shares. Why? Why should NIT be bailing out the richest Pakistanis? Let them,
let the market figure it out.
Let the market figure this out. So at this point, the money will come into the market when the markets are stable. And as you see, as the markets are now going gangbusters and going up, as interest rates will go down, you will see more people.
More capital flowing in.
So there are certain issues where there is no immediate cure, and cures are worse than just letting the problem persist for a while. So let the problem solve itself.
All right, this makes sense. So in terms of industry, I think one thing that we need, everyone agrees, is getting more export-oriented in industry. We know it's a J curve, all of that. What do you think needs to be done, or what would Awam Pakistan's view be in basically doubling down on export-oriented industry?
This is my view, not necessarily Awam Pakistan's view, but hopefully the Awam Pakistan party, Awam Pakistan will listen to me as an economist. One of the things that I'd asked Shehbaz Sharif Saab, one of the reasons why we have so much exports, so little exports, and all our production is domestic, for domestic consumption, is because we have protected our economy at the gate. We have such high interest rates, such high tariffs, that it becomes more profitable. So a company like Candyland, for instance, because there are not too many imported candies, sells more easily to Pakistanis. But one of the reasons why we were not able to export was because sugar in Pakistan was always more expensive than the international price.
Because of price.
Wheat in Pakistan was always more expensive than international price. Today, when sugar and wheat in Pakistan are not much more expensive than, sugar is cheaper and wheat is a little more expensive than international prices, we are exporting like crazy to Middle East, to America, to Europe, everywhere. Okay? So A, make sure that don't interfere in prices. So that automatically happens, that people will export, and those goods will be exported where you have comparative advantage.
Yes.
And the other thing is that I would punish, because we coddle exporters, normally, but give huge profits to people who sell to domestic. I would punish the guys who sell to domestic by a 10% tax. Now, it's not a very popular thing because so many of my friends are industrialists, but here's the thing. If you have zero exports, we'll give you a 10% extra tax.
That's how it should be.
If you have 5% of your sales coming from export, that will go down to, let's say, 7.5. If you have 10% sales...
A sliding scale.
Sliding scale. So that if you have more than 20% exports, zero tax. Okay.
So essentially, you're pushing entities to actually export.
Exactly, because you have already made it very profitable to sell to local government. Now, it used to be. Now, because of the gas and oil, electricity prices and all that, we do a lot of distortion. Then I will give one price of gas, one price of electricity to everybody, and not worry about whether you are exporter or you're import substituter or whether you're this. Whether if you're in textile, like for instance, textile today get cheaper gas, because you're textile and you're export sector. But if you're cement, you don't get. This makes no sense. So everything should be uniform prices, no distortion, but a little more tax on people who sell to local companies. But already now, because of 49% tax, I don't think I'll increase another tax.
So that is what I was coming to Pakistan. I'm just talking to someone right now that why doesn't foreign investment come into Pakistan? The tax rate also, why would anyone bother when there are like tons of other countries where you can do much more in a much less riskier way than essentially come to Pakistan and pay 49% effective tax. How do we reduce corporate tax?
39%. Not 49, 39%.
After including dividend?
That's 54%.
That's 54%. So how do we...
Then if you include WFP and...
So that just keeps on, it doesn't make sense at this point.
So the reason why we don't get foreign investments is because foreigners read newspapers. Okay? And when they read in Dawn that companies that have already made profits in Pakistan, like Unilever and Procter & Gamble, have not been allowed to send their dividends for 6 months, that we owe Chinese companies 470 billion rupees that we've not paid.
That's an insane number every time.
Then a guy sitting in Middle East or a guy sitting in elsewhere in the world will say,
why bother?
Let me figure this, let Pakistanis figure some of the things out. Let them get out of the foreign currency crisis. Let them get some things right, and then I'll come. The fact of the matter is that in the last 30 years, or maybe even longer, we've not gotten $1 of foreign investments in Pakistan, which is meant to export things out of Pakistan.
Yeah, that's right.
The people who come and invest in Pakistan, whether Unilever Pakistan or whether Jazz or whether, Toyota, and we are very happy to have them here, and we are delighted that they're here and they're large taxpayers, and thank you for providing jobs in Pakistan. But all of them sell to Pakistanis.
Yeah.
But when somebody wants to make shoes or jeans or t-shirts and then sell abroad, they go to Vietnam, they go to Bangladesh, they go to Ethiopia, they go to Cambodia. Nobody comes to Pakistan.
So how do we flip this equation?
First is that you're doing one right thing right now today, which is the Azme Istekam, is it called? Azme Istekam, which is Radd al-Fasad, part 2.
Some new name, always.
Well, we always like these
some difficult
names, right? Arabic or Farsi difficult name. But anyway, whatever the name is, we need to get rid of terrorism in Pakistan. And the law and order problem has to be solved. No foreigner will come to Pakistan. Look, our buyers don't come to Pakistan.
So, Miftah bhai, I've got an alternate view on that. Brazil, take a Sao Paulo. You cannot just even go in a cab in Sao Paulo without having Google Maps open, lest they take you somewhere else. Too many countries in the world, too many cities which are dangerous, which have got a high, let's say, mortality rate or homicide rate. Is that really a problem?
Of course it is a problem.
It is a problem, but is that really a problem?
This is the biggest problem in Pakistan. Before you were born, and when I was a young kid in Karachi, and there's some technological reasons also, every foreign airline used to come to Karachi. Okay? Not a single foreign airline now wants to even keep their crew in Karachi. These Middle Eastern airlines come, they do up and down. Even Thai Airways that comes to Karachi does up and down.
Because the risk is too high.
So don't compare ourselves.
Absolutely, not denying that.
Don't compare to Brazil or any other country, okay? This is a serious law and order issue. The Chinese president is talking to you about this. I mean, look, in the last 30 years, we've not been able to get a single foreigner. I mean, our company, we are the largest food exporter out of Pakistan. We can't get a single foreigner to come to Pakistan. When we get these engineers from abroad, right now, for instance, in Hub, there used to be a rule that a Chinese can only be traveling in bulletproof cars. Now they don't even let you travel. You have to live in the same factory. And when a Chinese engineer is working, there's 2 Jawans from one of the security agencies who have to, stand guard with a automatic rifle, then we have our own couple of security people there. There is no way to run a country. So we need to get rid of terrorism one way or the other. And the thing is that we are good at kinetic operations, but we have to go beyond that. Then once the operation ends, then we have to make sure that the supply line of Taliban breaks and new kids are not going there. So we have to also think about social policies. You can't just, there is
assimilation.
Assimilation, training, jobs, a lot of stuff, It's not just a matter of, operations, it's also a matter of policy.
Yeah.
So we need to do both these things. But at this point, I totally support, 100% support.
Yeah, that's
it should not even be controversial.
Yeah. Okay, I think we've done more than an hour of this. Just final words. One thing that people really agreed on is that the state should not be in the business of running anything other than there is a market failure. Secondly, we should let market prices prevail and the markets adjust itself. Final words of what really needs to be done. What's the first thing you would do if you're finance minister once again?
I'll ask the Prime Minister to form an NFC committee. I will ask the Prime Minister to change the privatization law and reduce the number of days. To this, I will reduce the footprint of the government, do away with a lot of ministries, and have a committee to look after permissions at all levels, local, federal, and all that. Our party would actually go for local governments, unless and until you have empowered local government that delivers services to the people, we can't go ahead. So those are the things.
Perfect. Thank you, Miftah bhai,
Thank you
for your time.